Good evening, everyone. Hi, and welcome to day 33. Quick note, so I don't forget today, t-shirt, Vox Tech. Trust us with your everything. It's a Has-Been Hotel reference. It'll make more sense when I get to brighter. This morning felt less like a build and more like a tune-up. So yesterday provided I could get through everything cleanly. So today became about making it feel more natural. Less like I'm following a plan and more like I'm just doing the work in the right order. I did catch myself trying to over-direct things and realized it's better to keep it simple. Know what kind of day it is. Let the work in front of me inform what it needs and just keep moving. Even the small details started to smooth out. Shorter notes, cleaner wrap-ups, just enough to keep things from getting too cluttered. It had that quiet feeling of things starting to click into place, like I'm not forcing the process now. I'm just stepping into it. Now, it's time to stop adjusting and actually, for the morning, go sing. So, the first session of the day, today I referred to as a blue day. Yes, I've reduced complexity by giving days different colors. A blue day basically means the focus is more on technical than strengthening. It's less about actually performing and more about understanding what's actually happening. And today I managed to do exactly that. This morning was Boulevard again. And it was not about performing it. It was about figuring out what my system is actually doing right now. I have just implemented a completely new set of technique, and I wanted to see how things were working. My first take today was 90, and it confirms something important right away. All these new coordinations that I'm doing, they're real. I can use them, but they're not fully integrated yet. So the most interesting part was how the higher notes behaved. Inside the song, they were really easy to access, but during warm-ups, I couldn't reach them. And this kind of tells me that phrasing and intention are currently doing more to organize the technique than basically an isolated control exercise is. Across the take, I could hear the improvements, the vocal color getting so much better. I'm not pushing it out as much, but it came with a cost. The pitch was not as stable. The timing loosened up, late entrances, the phrases became more broken up. There was no real continuity between them. So what it really showed me is that the system is trying to redistribute resources. The analogy I kept coming back to was a role-playing game when you have a finite number of points to allocate on your character. And right now, I am putting more of those points into all of this new technique, and that means I'm temporarily not balancing them across everything. And I went on to take 91, and it became a deliberate contrast test. So for 91, I shifted focus toward phrase connection instead of new technique. And at first, it honestly sounded like I'd taken a major step backwards. I was comparing it to takes that I'd done a week and a half ago. Vocal color was gone. The pitch instability came back. And a lot of older habits that I'd actually exercised began showing up again. But that's really not what happened. I thought about it. And what I did was avoid using the new technique in the hopes that I would see what I had originally been up to. But what I did was remove something that is already helping more than I actually have realized. It really made it visible. The best way to describe this is a Jenga tower. I pulled out a piece that didn't look critical, or at least not yet, and the structure immediately got weaker, which proves that that piece was carrying more load than I thought it did. And if takes were sentient and could talk, this one was emphatically pointing that one out and telling me. So the new coordination isn't just something I'm adding, like lettuce on a sandwich. It's already beginning to act like structural support. Even though it's not fully integrated, certain components are shifting over to that system. And they are getting used to the new system, so pulling it out now leaves them unsupported entirely. So what looked like regression was really actually just a test, and honestly, a really useful one. Now, after 90 seemed uneven, 91 seemed like a step backwards, but I had that realization of what was going on. I just decided at that point it was good to stop for the morning, because another take or any more wouldn't have really added anything or given me further clarity. They would have pushed me into overcorrection. And for today, the goal was not to get a great take. It was to understand what's actually happening under the hood. And that's what I got. So the takeaway from the morning isn't tied to take 90 or take 91 individually. It's tied to what information I got looking at them together. My system isn't breaking from this new technique. It's reorganizing around it. And that means the new coordination has to stay in place as a new foundation while everything else starts getting layered back in over time. At the end of the session, the truth becomes pretty clear. I didn't break the system. I revealed how it's currently being held together. And that alone makes this, for me, a successful session. And in retrospect, after I got the tips for the new technique, I said, no, I'm going to need at least a week before I follow up. This isn't I plug it in and it works. And today it was really clear that I had made the right decision. Okay, so the rest of my sessions today, and there were two, were more construction than singing. I moved back to the block read between, which is the next section of Boulevard. And it ended up being a lot more productive for me than it looked like it was going to be. Once I had everything lined up and confirmed of what I was working with, that helped a lot. I shifted into mapping the piece instead of trying to learn it line by line. And this is where things started to simplify. Instead of trying to capture everything exactly as it is, I reduced the problem down to something more manageable. I set a bass rhythmic unit, bop, 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 confirmed that all four voices in this section are completely locked into the same timing and focused on what actually matters. How does that pitch move for each voice? And how do those parts stack on top of each other? That shift really changed everything. From there, I built out a quick way to capture what I was hearing using symbols instead of words, and mapped the full contour of the anchor voice by hand. At that point, I wasn't trying to figure out the song anymore. I was mapping how it behaves. Where does it rise? Where does it settle? Where are the peaks? How does it transition? So later on, I'm not guessing. I know musically the direction it's supposed to go. I ran into a couple of edge cases that normally would have slowed me down. There's a discrepancy between my source material and the end product. There's a lyrical change. And I still have some uncertainty around exactly how long certain notes are in that section. But I am as ADHD as they come. I could have spiraled at that point. But instead of getting distracted, stopping to resolve those little problems, I just flagged it to keep myself aware of it so that I wouldn't forget about it. And I kept going. The contour map for the anchor melody came out really clean. The overall shape is clear. The peak structure is easy to see. I can see the tops, and I can see how it destabilizes closer to the chorus. By the end of the session, I had a full first pass map of that anchor voice. And more importantly, I now have a way to move through the rest of this without getting stuck on every small detail. All in, about an hour of work. And it feels like I'm no longer just approaching this with an idea. I now have a reliable way to move through it. My third session was actually my first working session for Brighter. This one was a pure build-focused overview. I did not do any singing. I am focused entirely on understanding what I'm working with before I start trying to perform it. Now, yeah, I've sung it informally a ton of times. And I do a reasonable Christian Borle. I, however, am not Christian Borle. There are clear contrasts and connections between Vox and the other voice. I realized that if I didn't think of them as separate characters, I could treat them more like two things at different points of a spectrum. And that shifted how I hear the entire song. It's less about telling a story and more about a perspective being justified in real time, while the events underneath it show how that perspective forms. From there, I mapped out the overall structure of the piece using lyrics, just breaking it into sections and figuring out what each part is doing. not in terms of plot, but in terms of movement. Where they start, where they shift, where they lock in, and in a way where it resolves. This gave me a much clearer internal roadmap. So now, instead of going into future sessions trying to figure out the piece, I have a grounding on how it flows and how it initially should feel. Basically, instead of entering tabula rasa, I'm entering with a foundation. And again, no vocal work for that, but I now have a solid foundation to build on. And for anyone familiar with the show, yeah, I actually went really deep on this one, but I don't want to talk about it because, in the words of River Song, spoilers, sweetie. But feel free to comment if you want to go back and forth on any of the episodes. Okay, here's the question that comes up every day, and I like going here. What do I think today was really about? I think I can bring it down to one word. And the word today was plastic. No, that's not it. Balance, that's the word. Since starting this journey, and technically it started about a month and a half before I started this journal. Since starting, I've been singing constantly, every day, except that brief stretch after the first day when I heard my voice recorded for the first time in decades. I took a few days off after that to heal. Honestly, that experience really did hit hard, and I did need those days off. But once I came back, almost, everything became focused on improving my voice. And it's important, but it's not actually the whole journey. The real journey, and I've mentioned this before, I think in the first episode, is to stand on a stage someday with an a cappella group that I helped build and perform in front of an audience. Somewhere along the way, I think I started narrowing too tightly onto just one part of that path. There are arrangements I want to build, projects I want to expand, more music that I want to shape. I even have an unfinished rearrangement sitting off in a side folder right now that's probably been waiting for me too long. Really like that song too. I think part of the reason I started reorganizing all of this was an internal realization that this journey can't just become sing more songs. It has to stay balanced. There's more to performing with an a cappella group than singing. There is so much more. So not everything needs the same amount of time. Not everything needs the same kind of work. And not everything grows the same way or at the same rate. So what's interesting is that almost everything I worked on today ended up circling back to that same idea. The Boulevard session was about balancing technique against stability. Read Between was about balancing complexity against clarity. And Brighter was more about balancing the character and structure understanding before trying to perform. Personally, today was also the first day in probably 2.5 months where I did very little actual rehearsal singing. Part of me missed it, but part of me missed everything else. Again, balance. I'm not done singing, not even close, but today reminded me that there are other parts of this journey, and honestly, other parts of my life that matter too. So, while I accomplished a lot today, I think the most important thing I actually found today was perspective. No breakthrough, no collapse. It was more like one of those plateaus you reach and then can build the next section from. And honestly, that feels kind of important. And I think that's where I'm going to leave day 33. Thank you for joining me, as always. I will, of course, be back tomorrow, because if there's one thing that I'm not balancing, it's doing a journal. But that will be day 34. And as always, later.